Tapia was like coughing tons. He seemed that they put like a jacket over him because it seemed almost like he was cold. So perhaps that had something to do with it. I mean, I'm sure that they weren't feeling the greatest to play the game, but I mean, nonetheless, you were up 6-2 in the first set. You had a tactic that was working. Why did he change it?
The difference between the lobs in the first set, they were so much more accurate and they were edging towards his left shoulder. And we've seen how lethal Galan is when you leave lobs short or lobs that are easily attacked because they go down the middle. And he just started putting them away.
One of the adjustments that they did, which I felt worked quite nicely, was Chingotto actually didn't come to the net when Coello was doing the bajada. So they did that in-game adjustment, and then that started working off really well because he was able to defend the ball much easier. And that gave them, I think, a lot of breathing space because at the beginning, Coello was winning quite a bit of points with that. So the more time passes by, the more it feels like this is just a two-horse race, and then you've got Los Super Pibes and Paquito and Lebrón at sort of a different level behind.
I really don't feel that there's that much of a difference, and they need that many more winners. It's just they're making the wrong decisions. Maybe they're taking too many risks. Maybe they're trying to go for too many winners, whereas actually they should be a little bit calmer. We've seen that Paquito's actually really calm, just sitting back on the court, playing lobs and lob after lob and using the back class because he's really comfortable defensively.
We can clearly see with Paquito and Lebrón that Padel is a team sport because they are arguably two of the greatest individual players, they're two of the greatest players of the history of the game, and they're not working, at least right now. So hi, everyone, and welcome to the Padel Pod, your weekly podcast covering professional padel, presented by Hugo and Gons. We're on to episode 52, and as always, joined by my co-host, Hugo. It's great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm actually a little bit sad, Gons, to be honest, because much like we were just chatting, I've just finished watching Nadal plays Zverev in the Roland Garros first round. Bit of a crazy first round, to be honest. I don't really understand how Rafa wasn't seeded for a tournament that he's won 14 times. But anyway, one of the few times that we'll be mentioning something beyond paddle on our podcast. But yeah, I really thought he had it, and it's a shame that he didn't manage to at least maybe win a set and kind of put a few doubts in Zverev's mind. But he's an icon of the game, and hopefully he'll be back next year. I have a feeling that he might give it one last try.
Yeah, incredibly sad. I mean, we're also big tennis fans, of course, and given we're Spanish, we do love Rafa Nadal. So I was also watching it, and so sad. Hopefully, this is not his last dance because he actually played unbelievably well. And as you said, he definitely had his chances in that match. And I mean, it was a terrible draw for him because Zverev's been also playing quite well. But yeah, hopefully not the last time we see him because we love him, and yeah, he's a great sport and unbelievable legend of the game. But speaking about the game, we should probably now move on and talk a bit about paddle because that's what we're here to do. But yeah, Hugo, I mean, we've now finished Mar del Plata, so one of the P1s of Premier Padel. It's actually been it feels like it's been a long time that we haven't had a P1, and maybe for those listeners out there that might not know the difference, so P1 is a slightly higher graded tournament in the Premier Padel Tour. So the players score 1,000 points. We've had I don't know if it's like the last 4 or 5 tournaments that have been P2s, and P2s the players get 500 points. So this is obviously quite a big tournament, probably I would say similar to the Masters thousands in tennis. Essentially, it's just a grade below the major, which is sort of similar to the Grand Slam. So a very important tournament played in Argentina. If I'm not mistaken, this is the only tournament in Argentina this year, which is, if not the home of paddle, is the second home of paddle. Very much, I would say, battling out with Spain. But yeah, wow. I mean, what a tournament, indoor as well. It was an incredible watch. I mean, Hugo, do you want to take it away? Maybe give your thoughts, or is there anything that you might want to ask me about it?
So, I think it's been a great intro, Gons. Yeah, I mean, great finally have a tournament in Argentina because, as you've just mentioned, the passion that the Argentinians live when they watch paddle is unbelievable. And hopefully going forward, I know a number of players have mentioned it on social media, just saying that hopefully going forward, Premier Paddle has more than just one tournament a year in Argentina. Because, for example, Spain is going to have at least 3 or 4 this year, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even 5. Obviously, when the World Paddle Tour was the main tour, there were plenty more in Spain, but still this year, first main year for Premier Paddle, there's Spain's still hosting 3 or 4, as I just said. And it's almost a shame that Argentina isn't hosting at least a couple, because I've got to be honest, the fans have been the best so far this season. They were so loud, so noisy, particularly loud, given that Fernando Balasterin, well, they paid tribute to his career, given that obviously, as we all know, he's retiring at the end of the season. And they were just chanting his name constantly throughout all his matches. And they probably urged him on to make the quarterfinals. I thought he was actually really, really good throughout this week in Argentina, but that's probably besides the topic. I think my main headline would probably be Galan strike back. And yeah, I mean, what a final. I thought the only thing I would say is comparing the overall level of the final to last week's final in Asunción, I thought it was a lot lower. I just don't know why, but I had the feeling that the players weren't at their best. I'd say out of the 4 players in the final, Chingotto was probably the only one that really played to his best. I know Galan had a sensational final, and looking at the statistics, he was probably the best player of the final. But the first set and a half, I thought he was making a lot of unforced errors, and you could see him that he was really struggling. And then after that break, when they broke Coello and Tapia's serve, when it was 2-2 in the second set, after that, he did kind of come back and start producing, well, the level of paddle that he's been producing recently. But then Coello and Tapia completely dropped, and they lost so many of their service games to love. And it just felt really weird. So, yeah, just thinking of the level, I thought the level throughout the week was great, but I think the level of the final was probably a step below last week's final. I don't know what you think, Gons.
Yeah, and I think the sort of score reflects that. I mean, 6-2 and then 2-6, 2-6. It kind of shows that it wasn't very competitive. It almost felt like, even though it's 3 sets, it almost felt like a match of 2 stories, essentially. The first set was one match in itself, one story, and then the last 2 sets was a completely different match, another story. And they were sort of driven, I think, by two main factors. I mean, you mentioned them. I think in the first set, Galan especially wasn't in the game. I felt like from a paddle point of view, Coello and Tapia played a lot to his left shoulder, a lot of lobs to his left shoulder, which meant that he would try to go for a rulo. And he actually missed a couple of them. They weren't very good. His b-board out wasn't very good. And so he wasn't really getting a lot of winners. His actual balance in terms of winners to unforced errors in the first set was 8 winners and 7 unforced errors, which is not very much like him. And it seemed to be working, this tactic. I mean, Coello Tapia seemed to be cruising in that first set. And then, as you mentioned, in the second set, they lost a break, and then it just almost felt like they collapsed. I think they had a couple of games that really uncharacteristic and unlike Coello and Tapia, where they were throwing them away essentially, and a lot of unforced errors as well. I remember Tapia which I think is when they broke, which was a low 40, and in that last point, he tried to do a sort of, as soon as they served, he tried to do a backhand volley through the door, which in a good day it works, but you're also like low 40 down. Do you really want to risk it like that? And this time he did get it through the door, but it was actually out. And it just felt like one of those where it was just mentally off it, and they were just like, they didn't really want to be there. And I also felt like they changed their tactics. So they started playing a lot more lobs to the middle, and Galan started to get his smash working a lot in the second set. And then from there on, he took over, essentially. I felt like after that and those little adjustments, Galan took over the match, and he was able to generate winners so easily. He smashed over 60%. and throughout the whole game. And this was like the first proper, like really slow court. And then on the other side, Coello and Tapia, smashing wise, were not very effective. If I'm not mistaken, combined, they were at 5 out of 27 in smashes. So incredibly low percentage. And Tapia, especially 1 out of 10, which is so unlike him because his smash is his best shot. Now, we did see that they, especially Tapia, seemed quite sick, actually. There was a changeover when they had to wait a bit because there was an issue with a fan in the stands and they had to get the medics over. Tapia was like coughing tons. He seemed that they put like a jacket over him because it seemed almost like he was cold. So perhaps that had something to do with it. I mean, I'm sure that they weren't feeling the greatest to play the game, but I mean, nonetheless, you were up 6-2 in the first set. You had a tactic that was working. Why did you change it? And they actually did speak about that as well in one of the changeovers. I remember Gustavo Prato and Coello saying, "Hey, we need to start playing more lobs again to Galan's rulo because every time he's coming in the middle, he's smashing it, and we can't do anything." So yeah, I guess those are my takeaways. And yeah, I mean, it just seems like it was a match decided by Galan, and but influenced heavily by that both pairs in sort of the first set, Galán and Chingotto not being really into the match, but then Coello Tapia sort of letting them into the match, and then Galán catching fire and finishing it off essentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the reason why they kept on playing lobs is because Galan's level was not there in the first set and set and a bit. So he was going for a lot of smashes and either missing them or leaving them short. And Coello and Tapia were being able to get to basically a counter attack and get the ball out por cuadro. So I think they just thought, hey, he's not at his best. He's suffering. You could clearly see Galan kind of angry at himself and not understanding why he was being so just nothing to do with his level over the last few months. And they were probably just saying, okay, well, let's give him a few presents, put a few lobs up in the air, and basically force him to go for the smashes. And it didn't work, as you said. The difference between the lobs in the first set, they were so much more accurate, and they were edging towards his left shoulder. And we've seen how lethal Galan is when you leave lobs short or lobs that are easily attacked because they go down the middle. And he just started putting them away. I think what you mentioned regarding Tapia and Coello being ill was a big reason why they potentially didn't perform to their best. Now, I know that they won the first set 6-2, but Coello mentioned throughout the week that they'd both suffered from flu. They both had like 39-degree fever, which is obviously really high. And to be honest, I'm quite surprised that they went out there to play. And apparently it was Coello that basically, Tapia caught it from Coello. So I think that's why maybe Tapia was suffering more in the final. Maybe Coello went through it towards the start of the week. And I do really think that affected it and affected the pair. And I think that I know what you're getting to. If you won the first set 6-2, you're clearly fine to play padel. But I think it was at that point, more or less, maybe at the start of the second set, when that issue with the fan happened, right, in the stands, and they had to stop playing. And I think that really killed Coello and Tapia's momentum. And I think what can happen when you're ill is that if everything's going great, then you don't really think about it. But when the things start going the wrong way and the momentum goes in the other team's favor, then you probably start thinking less clearly. And you could clearly see that from Coello and Tapia's shots. They were taking too many risks. They were going for winners too early on in the points. Actually, when they were going for changeovers and every couple of games when they're at the bench, Gustavo Prato, their coach, was saying, we don't have to win the point within the first 1 or 2 shots. Just give it a couple more shots. Funnily enough, I know that there weren't that many points that were long in the match. There were actually, most of them were quite short, but the statistics regarding long points won by both teams, Coello and Tapia won more of the long points than Chingotto and Galan. So I personally think that they should have just completely changed their strategy and just, give an extra ball, make them play, make Galan and Chingotto win the point, because as we know, Chingotto struggles to generate a lot of winners and Galan wasn't having his best night. So yeah, I was just surprised that they were going for winners and risking the points so quickly. And I think that actually comes back to when you're ill, you probably think less clearly. And I have a feeling that a lot of it came from that. Nonetheless, I do think that Chingotto was key to Galan and him winning that game, because in that first set, when Galan wasn't at his level, he was constantly encouraging him. And to be honest, he was basically holding up the pair and pulling the whole weight of the pair. And even though Galan then turned it around and, well, generated 36 winners compared to just 13 unforced errors, I think that Chingotto was crucial throughout the final, and probably the only player that remained quite consistent throughout the final. So yeah, I mean, I'd say those are the main reasons why. One quick thing that I did want to add is that I did feel that one big change compared to last week's final in Asunción, was that Galan and Chingotto changed their strategy and played a lot more balls to Tapia. Now, when we looked at basically the total percentage of balls played last week, I think Tapia was in and around something like 35%. Now, in this week's final in Mar del Plata, it was 48% versus 52% to Coello. So very, very even. And it clearly paid off. So does that mean that the strategy is don't give Coello that much of the ball, share it out a bit more evenly? Because actually what that means is what we saw last week, that Coello just becomes, he just becomes on fire. He just gets really in form and starts winning the points himself. I don't know. I think going forward, it'll be interesting to see how the strategy evolves, because I didn't feel that they were trying to freeze out Tapia as much as they did last week, and it worked.
Yeah, to that freezing point, I do think that's maybe more of a one-off and related to the fact that Tapia just seemed mentally a bit more off it. I mean, I do think that the sort of main strategy going forward, if you think that both Coello and Tapia are fine, it's probably to still play a bit more to Coello. But Tapia was just visibly, especially after that second set, and when Galan and Chingotto broke them, it was clear that Tapia mentally just kind of didn't want to be there. He was risking shots like way too much, even for his standard, which is amazing. And most of the time he does get them in, but he was sort of not playing maybe what I would call like winning paddle in terms of like actually going for a strategy and stuff. So maybe Chingotto and Galan sensed that, and they were like, look, I think it's fine now that we can sort of play more to Tapia and we don't have to rely as much on having to play to Coello. But yeah, that was definitely a noticeable change compared to the other two matches that they've had like played previously, where Coello was heavily involved compared to Tapia. Now, I do think to Chingotto's point, I mean, overall, I still feel like he wasn't as great. Like, he wasn't as bad as Galan in the first set, but he also wasn't like incredible. It definitely feel like they both did pick up the level in the second and third set. I mean, looking at Chingotto's sort of contribution score in the sort of first set, he was still negative 4.3 and Galan was negative 4.7. So I still feel like Chingotto definitely could have played a bit better in sort of that first set. But I do definitely get your point about being emotionally helping Galan. And at the end of the day, it's true that they're never going to win the match with Chingotto being the sort of lead of the pair. It has to come from Galan. So I definitely agree with you that even though Galan was missing a lot of shots and it didn't seem like he had it in him for this game, he definitely was there, like supporting him so much. And then towards the end of the match, or like from the second set, he definitely even added, I feel like, a lot more to his game and generated a lot more winners. So the emotional point of view or the mental side of the game, he was a massive support to Galan for sure. And even himself, I do think that he picked it up in the second and third set and definitely was like a lot better. But then Galan took over the match essentially and won it for them. I also want to highlight, I think one of the sort of really nice in-game adjustments that I feel that they did as well was Coello was really being effective with his bajada. I mean, this tournament, Coello's bajada has been like absolutely ridiculous. Like the ball is flying, and they're not even like, it's not even just coming off the ground, like not even a centimeter off. And if that ball hits you, like you're gonna get knocked out. Honestly, it looks like it's got venom in it. But one of the adjustments that they did, which I felt worked quite nicely, was Chingotto actually didn't come to the net when Coello was doing the bajada. So they did that in-game adjustment, and then that started working off really well because he was able to defend the ball much easier. And that gave them, I think, a lot of breathing space because at the beginning Coello was winning quite a bit of points with that. So it was nice to see that in-game adjustment as well from them, and it clearly worked. And but yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this match was a bit of a, I don't want to say like a one-off, because it's Galan is still playing at this level, and I still feel like Chingotto and Galan had to win the match, and he played at an incredible level. But it does feel like they were helped a bit in a way by Coello and Tapia, whose level just completely disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I doubt that we'll see a similar match between them, between both pairs, between now and the end of the season. I thought, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, I thought the level of all players was well below the level that they're currently performing at. I know that Galan ended up with 36 winners, 13 unforced errors, which is, those stats are unbelievable. But his first set and half was actually quite poor. So, and we've already spoken about Coello and Tapia's level throughout the match. Chingotto, I think he probably performed relatively similarly to what he's kind of got us used to. He only, I think it was something like 6 unforced errors throughout the final, which is just so low. I mean, Tapia, who was the next best player in terms of unforced errors, produced 12, so double. So I think Chingotto more or less performed to what we're expecting from him and what everyone expects from him, but I don't think the rest of the players did. So, yeah, I mean, nonetheless, third tournament for Chingotto and Galan so far this season, and it's looking like they are the real contenders for the number one spot.
Yeah, it does feel like there is when Chingotto and Galan first initially got together, and that caused it caused basically Paquito and Lebrón to get together as well. And we had all these pair changes. It definitely felt like it was a sort of big four forming. But the more time passes by, the more it feels like this is just a 2-horse race. And then you've got Los Super Pibes and Paquito and Lebrón at sort of a different level behind. And I guess this is something that we wanted to talk about as well. It definitely feels like Galan and Chingotto are definitely the sort of only real contenders. I guess, Hugo, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think?
Well, funnily enough, if you'd asked me a few weeks ago when the whole Galan-Lebrón split took place and Paquito and Lebrón teamed up, well, and everyone knows how, well, I was expecting big things, from Paquito and Lebrón, and I was expecting big things from Chingotto and Galan as well, but I really wasn't expecting them to be at this level and this consistent. I mean, they've just been outstanding, and both of them are playing the best paddle that they've ever played. So personally, I do think that currently it's a 2-horse race for the number one spot. When you look at the points, so Chingotto and Galan have now surpassed the 20,000 point mark when you combine both players' points together. Coello and Tapia, if I'm not mistaken, are on something like 24,000 points. So there's still quite a big difference, more or less 4,000 points between them, but they are cutting it down. Now, if you go down to the third and fourth pairs, which are obviously Paquito and Lebrón and Stupan y Neno, they're both on something like 17,000 points. So there's now almost the same distance between Stupan y Neno, Paquito and Lebrón and Chingotto and Galan than between Coello and Tapia and Chingotto and Galan. So yeah, it almost feels like they're right now they are competing in a different league. Now, I'm hesitant to be certain regarding this subject because I do think that the Super Pibes played really well in their semi-final against Chingotto and Galan, and they were probably dominating both sets when they started. But Chingotto and Galan found the way to come back and get back into the match and win that game 2 sets to love. And now they're 4-0 against the Super Pibes. However, I do think that the Superpibes are really improving, and I do think they're bound to start winning, to win, to either beat Coello and Tapia and or Chingotto and Galan, and we know what that would do for their momentum and how important momentum is in paddle. And Paquito and Lebrón, hey, again, not a great week in Mar del Plata, but they're two of the best players in the world, and I just think that their situation could turn around as quickly as we've seen it gone the other way. So you never know. But yes, right now, I do really see Chingotto and Galan and Coello and Tapia as the only real contenders between now and the end of the season, because Paquito and Lebrón, or the Superviviers, would have to make up a 7,000 point difference with respect to Coello and Tapia. So I think that's probably too much of a distance.
And how concerned are you for Paquito and Lebrón?
It's a great question. I'm obviously more concerned than last week, because last week in Asunción, they had 2 match points against Coello and Tapia in the semi-final. I know they ended up losing that match, and Coello and Tapia were the eventual winners of the tournament. So I was quite excited regarding their what Paquito and Lebrón, what was to come for them. Now, this week, I know they went out early, but they did go out to Coki and John, who they've already, they actually lost to on throughout their debut tournament in Brussels, if I'm not mistaken. And I do think that the conditions in Mar del Plata were pretty ideal for Coki and John. We know how good they are on slow courts, and they were outstanding in that game against Paquito and Lebrón. So I think they are a pair that one can lose to. I don't think that Lebrón and Paquito have had any kind of stinkers, if you want to call them that way, where you lose against a really low seeded pair or something that you really should not be losing to. They're losing to probably the 6th, 7th best pair right now in the world. So it's understandable. What does concern me more is just how they're looking on the court and their kind of physical vocabulary. And in particular, I'm quite concerned about Lebrón level. Now, looking at the statistics regarding that, what was it, the round of 16 match against Coki and John, Lebrón produced something like 13 winners, 12 unforced errors. Now that's a really poor statistic for someone like Juan Lebrón. And even more concerning than that was his decision making, at least in my eyes. He was going for some really random shots, trying to go for a quick smash, and he was always getting caught out. But then he wouldn't change that. He'd get caught out with a quick smash and then try and go for it again, like a couple of points later. So I really think that his decision making is letting him down right now. And funnily enough, I think Paquito played quite well this week in Mar del Plata. It was more Lebrón that let the pair down. So yeah, I mean, I think that their situation could turn around very quickly between now and the end of the season. I think one match, if they have one big win against either Tapia Coello or Chingotto and Galan, who actually they haven't faced so far. So you'll see what happens when that takes place. If they have a big win against one of those 2 pairs, I think that could really turn around their situation. But I am concerned.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely concerned. If I'd have to give it a score out of 10, probably say 7 or an 8, just simply because I'm going to give you a couple of arguments. And one's going to be a paddle related argument, and one's going to be a more of a feeling argument.
Yep.
So the paddle related argument, which is sort of one of my main concerns that I had with both of them when they sort of joined forces, and why I picked Chingotto and Galan over them, is simply that neither of them have the capability to generate winners easily. And when I say that, I mean it in relation to the top pairs, because they're obviously aiming to be at the top, right? I'm not saying that they can't generate winners. What I'm saying is when you compare them with Galan, with Coello, with Tapia, they're just not generating as many winners as them, and they are competing straight with them. So when we actually look at the winners and unforced errors graph, they're actually always in and around the average in terms of generating winners. They actually sometimes they generate less winners than players even like Arroyo or even Sacher, but maybe they don't generate as many unforced errors, but they're always sort of in that average middle section. And maybe I'll put like a graph so people can see in how like how they generate winners compared to like the overall, not so the rest of the players. So they're always sort of like that average, maybe a little bit above average. And we know how offensive the game is today. It's all about, can you generate winners easily? It's all about the offensive side. So I just feel like the fact that they can't do that easily is sort of like a big limit for them and what they can do. And like I said, especially when you compare it with the top players. So that's the paddle argument. The feeling argument is one that you touched, and it just kind of, it's hard to see how they can be successful when they're both very similar in terms of how they are wired mentally and the emotional side. They're both incredibly emotional players. They're both, we saw how Lebrón in Mar del Plata against Coki and John wasn't really feeling it. And I'm just not sure if when he's in that state, a player like Paquito, who's very similar to him, can really help him, like Chingotto does with Galan, for example. So it just feels like that chemistry and that sort of personality type. I'm not sure if that's like a winning formula, let's say, when you've got Chingotto and Galan, where maybe Chingotto is very cool-headed and can help Galan in those moments when he's like maybe just struggling a bit more emotionally. And then Coello and Tapia are sort of a bit more cool-headed, if you will. So they don't really just get stressed and stuff, but it's a bit of like a cocktail or chemical experiment when you've got players like Paquito and Lebrón. And so I'm a bit concerned about that. And we saw that reflected in Mar del Plata, where Lebrón was visibly uncomfortable and his body language wasn't great. And I'm just not sure if a player like Paquito can really sort of get the right side of him to be like, okay, look, like, let's calm down. Let's start playing the paddle that we know how to play. So that's my feeling argument. And then another sort of side point, which I just want to mention, and I think it's very interesting, is the fact that we can clearly see with Paquito and Lebrón that paddle is a team sport, because they're arguably two of the greatest individual players, they're two of the greatest players of the history of the game, and they're not working, at least right now. So one can clearly see from that there is a, paddle is a team sport in the sense that there's certain players that you probably fit better with, that you have certain aspects of your game and the other player complements those aspects or can help you sort of even make your own characteristics better. And then from the mental side as well. So it's very interesting to see that at the moment they're just not clicking and they're not unlocking the full potential as a pair, because individually they're still amazing players, right? They're still like some of the best players in the world. So that's another point that I wanted to raise aside, because I just thought it was very interesting, given that we obviously talked about paddle being a team sport or not. Jorge in Jorge Martinez's interview, which he did highlight, and he did say that it was a team sport. So I just wanted to bring this as well, because it sort of made me think about that.
It's a great point, and I couldn't agree more. Now, a few points to kind of counter argue what you've just said. Firstly, let's not forget that Paquito and Lebrón were the number one seeded pair in the world about, was it 6 years ago? Something like that. I can't remember when it was exactly.
It's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago, but they were equally or even more crazy and emotionally unstable back then. Paquito today is far less crazy and far less emotional. And I think we are seeing a slightly calmer side of him on the court. And Lebrón obviously has his peaks. We all know that. But I do think that they're both calmer compared to what they were back in the day. And they worked. I mean, they became the number one pair in the world. Now, it didn't last very long. And they didn't last very long together, probably because of that, because it's even if you're performing on the court, maybe the personal side of that pair relationship deteriorates when the emotional side gets the better of a player. So, but I'd actually personally say that the bigger worry with them is that, particularly Lebrón this week, but we've seen it with Paquito previous weeks, is that they're not performing to their best individually, because I do agree that they're not performing very well as a pair. They don't seem as in sync as the other top three pairs. When you watch Stupan and Neno, they're so in sync. They leave no gaps. They know exactly where they're both going to be during the point. Coello and Tapia, same, and Chingotto and Galan, exactly the same. They both know their jobs. Now, Paquito and Lebrón don't feel that way, but maybe that's just the way that pair is going to be. Maybe that's the kind of that chaotic element is just what they are, and they're not going to be able to ever have that synchronization that some of the other pairs have. But maybe that's fine as long as they're both performing to their best or very well. And that's the issue. They're not. Lebrón wasn't at his best this week in Mar del Plata, far from it. Paquito wasn't at his best when they joined forces a few weeks ago, well, maybe a couple of months ago now, actually, although now he's increased his level. So I really want to see if they both reach their individual best, what happens with that pair, because I still think that they can turn around that situation. And then just another kind of counterpoint regarding the obviously generation of winners and how many winners that Paquito and Lebrón can generate. I actually disagree. I think they can generate loads of winners. I do agree that their overhead game right now is not at its best. Both Paquito Smash is not as effective and lethal as it used to be, and he's not using it as much, probably because he's not as confident with it. And we know that Lebrón Smash is definitely not what it used to be. But I think that they both can generate a lot of winners. Paquito with both his smash, but also his víbora and his forehand volley. And I think Lebrón, particularly with his volleys, but even his drop shots and when he gets close, very tight to the net and produces a por cuatro, I think they can generate a lot of winners. And I do agree that paddle is becoming more of a more and more offensive game. And we see that Chingotto and Galan and Coello and Tapia can produce so many winners because Coello, Tapia, and Galan are just machines of producing winners. But that's the case right now. We saw that last year, Stupan Neno almost clinched the number one spot at the end of the season. And personally, I don't know whether you agree, but I'd say Stupan Neno have, at best, the same potential to generate winners when you compare them to Paquito and Lebrón. And they still managed to be up there. So I don't think that they need that many more winners. This is Paquito and Lebrón I'm talking about. I just think they have to reduce the number of forced errors that they produce, and also just probably improve that mental side of the game and make better decisions, because I think it's actually the decision making that's letting them down in a lot of ways.
Yeah, to I guess counter argue your winner's point. I mean, they can generate, but the reality is they're not, and we can see that by the stats. They're not in that top bracket. So now, can they turn around? Sure. Do they have the potential? Sure. But the fact of the matter is they're just not doing it, and it's quite a big sample size that we have now. So I just don't know if I have that belief in them that all of a sudden they're gonna turn it around and they're gonna start generating winners to the level of Coello, Tapia, and Galan. So I guess that's one side. And in terms of, I do agree in terms of the play. We still haven't seen, I guess, either of them at the best. It almost feels like at some points Paquito's playing really well and maybe Lebrón isn't, and Lebrón isn't playing well and Paquito is. So that I do agree with you. We still haven't seen both of them at a super high level, let's say. So it'll be interesting to see if they can manage to do that, and if that does happen, then how does that look like? What are the results of that? But I think there's a lot of, frankly, I think there's a lot of pressure on them. I think a lot of people had very high expectations, and for the time being, they're just not meeting those expectations. Let's be real. So I think there's another element of, are they going to give each other time? Because it does feel like this needs a bit of time to adjust, to decide on how they really want to play and how they're going to be as a pair. So I feel like there's sort of a pressure there and we know how results driven the game is. And I don't know, could they be tempted to move away? Because I know that there's the argument of, oh, who are they going to go with? But realistically, I mean, Yanguas and Garrido, for example, I think for both of them would be incredible. And it'd be, if you say oh, well, Garrido and Yanguas, they're not going to split because they're having an amazing season. Well, I mean, you're still getting the call from, let's say, if you're Garrido, from Lebrón, who you've probably adored. They're both from the south of Spain. Garrido is probably dreaming of playing with a player like you. There's that human side of it, right? You can't just say like, oh, because he's gets along with Yanguas or like he's having a great season with Yanguas. Like until you don't get that phone call from Lebrón, it can be, I'm sure it can be a tempting call. And potentially Stupan Dineno as well, who they're still, I guess, trying to figure that offensive side of the game and improve on that. There's also pressure on them to deliver. So I don't know. I just feel like basically my main question for them is, are they going to give each other the time to really explore this and really make this work, or is the whole pressure really going to sort of kick in and then they're just going to get a bit more desperate and then potentially split?
It's a good question. Just a very, very, very quick point on the winners generation situation. I was just looking at the stats regarding, well, the stats for Coki and John's last 16 match against Paquito and Lebrón. Paquito and Lebrón generated 30 winners. Coki and John generated 34. Not a huge difference. I know they're not a pair that generates loads of winners, but not a huge difference. And then I was looking at the statistics. Galán and Chingotto versus Stupandineno in the semi-finals. Galan and Chingotto together generated 34 winners. So just 4 more winners than what Lebrón and Paquito generated against Coki and John. So I really don't feel that there's that much of a difference and they need that many more winners. It's just they're making the wrong decisions. Maybe they're taking too many risks. Maybe they're trying to go for too many winners, whereas actually they should be a little bit calmer. We've seen that Paquito's actually really calm, just sitting back on the court, playing lobs and lob after lob and using the back class because he's really comfortable defensively. And sometimes Lebrón just getting a little bit frustrated and taking a chance and going for a kind of a volley battle and just taking the risk. And we know how risky those movements are. That's where I think they should maybe just tone it back and say, hey, if we're so comfortable and so good at the back, because I do think that both Lebrón and Paquito can be really good defensively, let's just change our game and let's just play to that strength. And when there's an opportunity to counter attack, take it, but not rush into that. And I feel they are sometimes rushing into that. Mainly Juan Lebrón, probably because he's been so used to doing that with Galan. Now, regarding them giving each other the time, I think it's going to completely depend on obviously how the next few tournaments go and whether they do manage to get a big win against either Coello and Tapia or Chingotto and Galan, or even Stupandineno, to be fair, because they haven't beaten them yet. I think that could obviously change their fortune. But I think it's also going to really depend on whether the other pairs split, the other top pairs split, because as you say, Yanguas and Garrido right now, they're probably the 5th best pair. I don't think there's many people that would argue the contrary. But if you're Garrido and Lebrón says, hey, do you want to team up? Of course I want to team up. I mean, if I was Garrido, I'd probably say, of course I want to team up. I mean, you're probably the best forehand player in the modern era. I definitely want to have the experience of playing with you. And if Lebrón suddenly gets back to his best, I'll be very well positioned to compete for tournaments and trophies. Because right now, realistically, they're not quite at that level. At least they won't be consistently in the finals, given how well both Chingotto and Galan and Coello and Tapia are performing. And the same for Yanguas, to be fair, having the opportunity to play with Paquito, a legend of the game. And I think their playing styles could suit each other quite well, because maybe Paquito right now in this stage in his career needs someone who covers the middle a little bit more than what perhaps you'd think when of a backhand player. And that's exactly what Yanguas does, because he's so big and, well, he's obviously really fit, and his bibora is such a useful weapon that he can cover that central area of the court. So I think it's going to massively depend on what other pairs do. Even Stupandineno, because as we've probably mentioned offline and we've chatted offline, if Stupandineno, I think if they don't see themselves challenging either Chingotto and Galan or Coello and Tapia between now and the end of the season in terms of number of tournaments won, number of head-to-heads won, they might think, hey, we should probably think about trying other options, because realistically, this is as good as we're going to get. And we know that Lebrón called Stupa when he was still playing with Galan, when they were both considering options. I wonder what Stupa would say if Lebrón called him at the end of the season, if the Superpibes haven't won any major trophies or they've struggled to be at Chingotto and Galan and Goyan Tapia's level. And probably the same with Dineno. Dineno had an excellent time with Paquito, and they really competed for that number one spot. So could we see a 2.0 version of that pair? Definitely. So I think that's going to be the big determinant, is what other pairs do.
Yeah, I mean, I see if there are these changes, I definitely see this driven by Paquito and Lebrón. So I see them, the first pair, essentially splitting up. I really do think that Los Superpibes are going to give themselves this year. And then if things don't go to plan, then maybe they start looking at other options. But if there's sort of like another big change prior to the end of the season, I think it would be driven by Paquito and Lebrón, and then them potentially calling Garrido and Yanguas. I definitely don't see Garrido and Yanguas sort of splitting up and then them calling Paquito and Lebrón and saying like, hey, do you guys want to play? So I definitely think that, to me, out of everyone, well, not maybe not everyone, but in terms of those top, like if there's another big change, like we had that sort of massive domino effect when Lebrón and Galan split, I think this one would be driven by Lebrón and Paquito splitting.
I do agree, but my only worry is that I think that, as you just mentioned, the Superpibes are definitely going to give each other the rest of the season, because they're obviously super close. Last year, they challenged for the number one spot right up until the end of the season. And I think they believe in themselves as a pair. And frankly, I do as well. So if Lebrón and Paquito decided to split before the end of the season, the only real pair that I think could be in it for them would be Garrido and Yanguas, because I don't see any other pair improving what both Lebrón and Paquito have right now, as in individually. I think after Paquito, Garrido would probably be Lebron's best pair, and after Lebrón, Yanguas would be Paquito's best pair. But that's it. I wouldn't see them going beyond that. I don't think that the level of the rest of the pairs and players individually are within that range. So I just don't know. I mean, it would have to be that pair or nothing for me.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but we'll see how it goes, because we've got a very exciting week ahead. We've got another P2 now in Santiago in Chile, so it's going to be very exciting again to watch some more paddle, because then after that, I believe there's going to be a bit of a break, if I'm not mistaken, as they sort of head back from South America, and now I guess more of a European tournaments are going to be played. But yeah, I hope all our listeners enjoyed this episode. A lot of paddle to talk about, and a lot of good stuff, a lot of good content. I really enjoyed that chat, Hugo, and I love our sort of little back and forths, because it's great to have these sort of arguments sometimes.
Agreed. I love a bit of a scuffle and a bit of a back and forth. And look, I think we all play devil's advocate when someone says a point and you can see the other side. But yeah, as always, real pleasure to be here. And guys, I hope you enjoyed. Obviously, please let us know your thoughts about the episode and just generally whether you have any kind of feedback, positive or negative, regarding topics that you want us to talk about, etc. It'd be great to hear your thoughts. Other than that, make sure you tune into this week's, it's another P1 actually, Premier Paddle P1 in Chile, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's a P1, isn't it?
Let me just quick. I swear to God, I thought it was a P2.
I might, to be fair, I could have
You
made a mistake. I think it would make more sense if it was a P2.
no, it's a
P1.
P1. Yeah,
There you
yeah,
go.
you're right.
So yeah, it's an important tournament going forward, and
Very
I think,
much.
yeah, I mean, Chingotto and Galan, if they win that, that really closes the gap between them and Coello and Tapia. Then I think the Superpibes and Paquito and Lebrón are going to be very, very excited to turn their fortunes around. And who knows, will Garrido Yanguas finally break through and win a tournament? I could see them doing it if they do have a couple of excellent days. So we'll see.
I'm looking at the draw right now, just very quickly. And to be fair, for Paquito and Lebrón, they've got a quite a easy path to the semi-final, but then they'd meet Coello and Tapia. So yeah, let's see how it goes. But maybe they can get a good couple of wins under the belt. they get confidence to play Coello and Tapia, and then we'll see how that goes. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone, and very much echo what Hugo has said. For you guys, if you want to leave us any feedback or any comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys.